Jason Myers was the perfect father, until the night his 2-year-old son, Caleb, vanished without a trace. Emily, his devoted wife, believed it was a kidnapping. Rachel, her sister, suspected something darker. But as detectives unraveled Jason's carefully constructed life, they uncovered a twisted plan years in the making, and a motive so disturbing it left even seasoned investigators speechless. Jason Myers seemed like the kind of man everyone admired. He had the house, the car, the career, and most importantly, the family that many only dreamed of. Nestled in the quiet suburb of Brookfield, a town where neighbors still waved to each other and kids played on green lawns, Jason and his wife Emily were seen as the picture of young success. They were in their early 30s, high school sweethearts who had stayed together through college, marriage, and now parenthood. When their son Caleb was born 2 years earlier, their happiness felt complete, at least from the outside. Their Instagram feed was a digital scrapbook of smiles, picnics, and milestones. Caleb taking his first steps, Caleb smearing birthday cake on his cheeks, Jason holding him on his shoulders at the county fair. Emily's captions were always glowing. "My boys, so blessed, couldn't ask for more." Friends often commented how lucky she was. But those who looked more closely might have noticed something strange. Jason smiled less in the recent photos. In some, he wasn't there at all. Around the neighborhood, Jason was polite but distant. He never lingered for small talk. While Emily often joined block parties and bake sales, Jason kept to himself. He'd tell people he was working overtime, always in demand at his IT job. No one questioned it. He made good money and always came home eventually. But there was one person who had started to question things. Emily's older sister, Rachel. Rachel had grown close to Emily again after Caleb's birth. They talked daily, and Rachel visited often. She had noticed the change in Jason first. His absence wasn't just in photos, it was in the way he interacted with his son. When Caleb toddled up to Jason during family visits, Jason would often be staring into his phone, barely responding. He wasn't cruel, he wasn't aggressive, but he seemed detached. Indifferent, almost robotic. Rachel brushed it off at first. Some new dads took longer to adjust, she reasoned. But still, something about Jason felt off. Things took a darker turn when Emily confided in her one night over coffee. She said she'd found strange texts on Jason's phone. Not romantic texts, just vague, coded messages to someone saved in his contacts under the name D. Messages like "still on track, just need time," or "can't back out now." Emily had confronted him, but Jason told her they were work-related. "Atta stuff," he'd shrugged. She didn't press him further, but her voice cracked when she told Rachel about it. She didn't believe him, not really. Then there was the money. Emily had noticed some large withdrawals from their joint savings account, amounts just under $10,000. Spaced out over several weeks. Jason claimed he was investing in a side project and would explain it soon. But there were no signs of any project, no papers, no new equipment, nothing. Emily's gut told her something was wrong, but she was scared to admit it even to herself. Still, no one could have predicted what was coming. The day before Caleb went missing, Jason had seemed calm, more affectionate than usual. He had made breakfast, helped Caleb get dressed, and even kissed Emily goodbye on the forehead, something he hadn't done in months. That night, he had gone into Caleb's room and read him a book. He hadn't done that in even longer. Emily felt a flicker of hope, maybe things were getting better. But in truth, Jason's sudden warmth was not a return to normal, it was a farewell. No one noticed the way Jason lingered in Caleb's room that night, standing in the doorway long after the lights were out. No one heard the deep breath he took before walking down the stairs and locking the front door with mechanical precision. And no one, not even Emily, sensed that everything was about to fall apart by morning. The next time she'd walk into that room, Caleb would be gone, and Jason would vanish with him. The storm had rolled in during the early hours of the morning. Rain tapped steadily against the bedroom windows as Emily stirred awake. The house felt unusually quiet, too quiet. Caleb usually woke up before dawn, babbling in his crib or crying out for his favorite stuffed animal, but this morning, There was only silence. Emily checked the time, 7:14 a.m. She sat up, disoriented, then turned to the other side of the bed. Jason was gone. She assumed he had taken an early shower or gone downstairs to start coffee. But when she padded through the hallway, past the bathroom empty and into the kitchen also empty, her unease grew. She called out softly, hoping not to wake Caleb if he was still asleep, but no answer came. The coffee pot was cold. Jason's phone wasn't on the counter, and his car keys were missing. Her breath quickened. Emily turned the corner and opened the door to Caleb's room. The crib was empty. For a moment, she froze, convinced she was still dreaming. Caleb wasn't in his crib. His blanket was folded neatly, his little dinosaur plush placed carefully on the pillow. But he was gone. Panic set in. She rushed through the house, calling his name, checking closets, the bathroom, the laundry room. Nothing. Then her phone rang. It was Jason. His voice was calm, almost too calm. He told her he had taken Caleb to the park early. "Thought you could use the rest," he said. Emily blinked, staring out at the rain-soaked yard. The park? In this weather? She asked which park, but Jason dodged the question. He said he'd be home soon. Then he hung up. Emily waited, pacing the living room, eyes darting between the window and the clock. Minutes turned into hours. She called him again. No answer. She called again. Voicemail. At 10:42 a.m. The dispatcher's voice was firm and focused. A patrol car arrived within 15 minutes. The officer took Emily's statement and immediately put out a notice. A statewide alert was issued for Jason Myers and 2-year-old Caleb Myers. The description of Jason's car, a silver 2017 Honda Accord, was broadcast to local law enforcement. Within hours, a small search team was combing the area. The rain made everything harder. Muddy trails, soaked fields, washed-out prints. The storm wasn't just hiding evidence, it was erasing it. Rachel arrived as Emily was giving her third statement. She held her sister tightly, trying to remain strong while her own hands trembled. Emily couldn't explain what was happening. She kept saying it didn't make sense. Jason had never shown signs of violence, never raised his voice, never lost control. But now, her baby was missing, and Jason had lied to her. By nightfall, helicopters with thermal imaging began scanning the woods near the edge of town. Police expanded their search radius, checking every park, gas station, and rest stop in a 50-mile area. Nothing. There were no sightings, no signals, no clues. It was as if Jason and Caleb had vanished into the rain. The following morning brought a grim development. Jason's car was found abandoned 75 miles away, off a rural road in a wooded area near a closed campground. The driver's seat was pushed back. Jason's height, the back seat was empty. But something felt wrong. The windows were rolled up and the doors locked from the outside. There was no car seat, no signs of a struggle. Just the faint scent of cologne and an old sippy cup on the floor. Forensics found faint traces of mud on the floor mats, consistent with someone walking through a wet, wooded area. No footprints, no blood, no note, just the hollow shell of a vehicle, and more questions. Why would Jason abandon the car so far from home? Where was Caleb? Was he alive? And if this was a kidnapping, why hadn't there been a ransom? The town of Brookfield held its breath. Volunteers gathered in the community center, organizing search efforts. Flyers were printed. Candles were lit. Prayers whispered. But beneath the hope, a darker fear was growing. Some began to suspect the unthinkable, that Caleb wasn't missing. He was gone, and Jason Myers knew exactly where he was. 2 days had passed since Caleb disappeared, and hope was starting to wither. Emily hadn't slept. Her voice had grown hoarse from interviews, from sobbing, from calling her son's name into the wind. Rachel stayed by her side, watching as her sister unraveled hour by hour. The police worked in rotating shifts, combing through forests, searching camera footage and checking hospitals. But no new leads came in. Jason's phone remained off. His bank cards hadn't been used. His online accounts had gone dark. It was as though he had stepped off the face of the earth. Then, just before sunset on the third day, a 911 call came from a hiker in Briarwood Forest, about 15 miles from where Jason's car had been found. The hiker, a middle-aged man named Grant Holloway, had gone off trail to photograph the wild mushrooms growing after the rain. What he found instead would shake the entire town to its core. Under a loose patch of wet leaves, hidden just a few feet from the base of a mossy tree, was a black garbage bag. Partially buried, oddly shaped, curious, Grant nudged it with his hiking stick. Something inside shifted unnaturally. The weight, the feel, it wasn't trash. It wasn't an animal. He called it in without opening it. When officers arrived, the forest was already turning dark. The scene was quickly roped off with yellow tape. The ground photographed, samples taken. An officer carefully opened the bag, and what they discovered confirmed everyone's worst fear. Inside was the body of a toddler, pale, motionless, wrapped in a blanket with faded dinosaur prints. The autopsy would later confirm the identity: 2-year-old Caleb Myers. Cause of death: asphyxiation. There were no bruises, no defensive wounds, no signs of struggle. He had been smothered, likely with his own blanket. It was quick, silent, deliberate. News of the discovery hit the town like a hammer. Emily collapsed when detectives broke the news. She screamed so loud the neighbors heard her from across the street. Rachel held her sister in the hallway as paramedics checked her blood pressure. The grief was indescribable, but beneath it, something else began to take hold. Something darker than sadness. Betrayal. Everyone now knew Jason hadn't been running from danger. He was the danger. The story shifted instantly. The worried father who had taken his son out early had become a fugitive, a child killer on the run. The community turned cold. Families who once greeted Jason with warm smiles now ripped his face from missing posters. People asked each other what they'd missed. How could he have fooled them all? Detectives dug deeper. A footprint near the burial site matched the tread of Jason's hiking boots. The soil analysis showed the ground had been disturbed about 36 hours earlier. The timeline: he had left the house, driven out past the state road, parked at the abandoned campground, and walked into the woods carrying his son. But what broke everyone's hearts was the condition of the blanket. It had clearly been tucked around Caleb, almost gently, as if Jason couldn't bear to leave him cold, but had already taken everything else from him. There was no note, no explanation, just a single act of monstrous finality. With this discovery, the search changed focus. The urgency to save a missing child was replaced with the need to capture a murderer. Jason's face appeared on every major news outlet. His mugshot, pulled from a past driver's license, was now the image people couldn't escape. It stared from TVs, gas station posters, bus stops, and still, Jason was gone. No calls, no sightings, no trace. The manhunt had entered its most critical stage. But the most terrifying question still hung in the air, unanswered and unbearable. Why? Why would a father, one who had held his son, fed him, played with him, commit the unthinkable? Everyone had theories. No one had answers. In the days following the grim discovery in Briarwood Forest, investigators turned their full attention to Jason Myers' life. No longer operating under the assumption of a distraught father in shock, detectives now viewed every detail of Jason's past through the lens of a calculated killer. What they began to uncover painted a portrait no one in Brookfield had ever seen before. A man living a carefully disguised double life, layered in secrets, deception, and something far more sinister. Jason had always been regarded as intelligent, even gifted with computers. At his job as a systems technician for a mid-sized logistics company, he was known for his quiet, competent demeanor. He rarely mingled with coworkers, but he got his work done. He was never late, never emotional, and never caused trouble. But when the company's HR team handed over his work laptop and company phone to authorities, investigators found something unexpected. Jason hadn't logged into his work email in over a week before the disappearance. In fact, he hadn't submitted a single ticket or responded to any client communications. What he had been doing instead was far more suspicious, using VPNs to hide his location, browsing sites about identity changes, and frequently messaging a woman named Vanessa. Vanessa Connors lived in a city 4 hours away. She worked as a dancer at an upscale nightclub and had met Jason 8 months prior through a dating app. What Vanessa didn't know was that Jason had lied about everything. He told her he was recently divorced, had no children, and was planning to leave town to start fresh. Their conversations were light at first, flirtatious and playful, but over time they took a darker turn. Jason began talking about how he felt trapped by his life, that he was suffocating in his marriage. In one message, he wrote, "Every day feels like a prison. I wasn't meant for this kind of life. I didn't choose it." Vanessa, according to her later interviews, thought he was being dramatic. She never imagined what he was hiding. Detectives subpoenaed Jason's financial records and uncovered something chilling. 2 months before Caleb's murder, Jason had taken out a life insurance policy on his son, one that paid out $100,000 in the event of accidental death. Emily had no knowledge of this. Her name wasn't listed anywhere on the documents. The beneficiary was Jason alone. Even worse, the policy had a clause: if the insured died within 90 days of the start date, it would trigger an investigation before payout. The murder occurred on day. The combination of this financial move, the secret relationship, and the sudden disappearance suggested meticulous planning. Jason hadn't snapped, he hadn't lost control, he had calculated this. Detectives confronted Vanessa with the findings. Visibly shaken, she denied knowing anything about Jason's plans. She said he had mentioned a fresh start, but never anything about a child. In fact, he had insisted that he was free of obligations, that they could move away together, maybe to another state, start a business. Jason had even told her he was about to come into some money. Back at the Myers house, Emily sat through every revelation with a blank stare. Her world had not only shattered, it had become unrecognizable. The man she had loved since she was 17 had been planning their son's death while sharing a bed with her. The photos on the walls felt like lies. Even the sound of the wind outside seemed different now, colder, quieter. Detectives believed the motive was becoming clear. Jason hadn't just wanted to escape his life. He wanted to erase every trace of it. He viewed Caleb as an obstacle, not a child. The money from the insurance was likely intended to fund his new life with Vanessa, a life where he could pretend none of it ever existed. But Jason hadn't counted on how hard it would be to vanish completely. And as investigators closed in, the walls were beginning to close around him. The question now was not just why he did it, but where he had gone, and how far he would go to avoid facing what he had done. 3 weeks after Caleb's murder, the trail had nearly gone cold. Authorities had poured time, manpower, and resources into tracking Jason Myers, but he remained elusive. With no credit card usage, no phone activity, and no sightings, he seemed to have vanished into thin air. But in the background, a specialized FBI team had taken over parts of the investigation. They weren't just following paper trails, they were digging into Jason's psyche. And it was there, in the patterns of his past, that they would find their next clue. Jason had no criminal record, no known history of mental illness, no violent incidents, no drug use, no arrests. But what he did have was a disturbing fascination, one that had gone unnoticed until agents searched his personal computer, recovered from a storage locker he had rented under a false name. 2 towns over, hidden in a series of encrypted folders, they found hundreds of bookmarked articles, case files and podcasts, each focused on one specific genre: disappearances, not ordinary ones. Jason had spent years studying how people fake their deaths, create new identities, and vanish. The articles spanned decades. Real cases, fictional scenarios, obscure forum threads. He had watched interviews with experts, read declassified FBI files, even downloaded blueprints for how to forge certain documents. Jason wasn't just fantasizing, he had been prepared. But even more disturbing than the content was the timeline. His earliest downloads dated back to before Caleb was even born. With this discovery, investigators began looking not just at where Jason might be, but who he might be pretending to be. They brought in facial recognition experts, tracked bus and train terminals, and reviewed surveillance footage from gas stations and travel hubs across multiple states. Days passed. Then a break came from a surprising place. A motel manager in New Mexico, nearly 1,000 miles away, had seen Jason's face on a news broadcast and called in a tip. She remembered him clearly because he'd paid in cash and given the name David Lane. She said he was polite, quiet, and had stayed only one night, but what stood out to her was the book he'd left behind in the room. The Stranger Beside Me, a true crime novel about Ted Bundy. Agents arrived at the motel and confirmed it had been Jason. Fingerprints on the TV remote matched his. But once again, he was gone. He had vanished sometime early that morning, likely on foot, likely with a new disguise. A map found in the trash nearby had several routes circled, routes leading into remote desert areas where no cameras, no phones, and no people would spot him. Jason's ability to disappear wasn't just luck, it was obsession. He had studied fugitives, the way a chess player studies grandmasters. He anticipated law enforcement steps. He knew how long gas station cameras stored footage. He even knew which states had the weakest DMV databases for ID checks. The FBI released a revised age-progressed image of Jason, altering his hair, beard, glasses, even skin tone. Billboards went up in neighboring states. Tips flooded in, most of them false, but every one had to be investigated. The pressure was building. Jason's image was becoming as recognizable as his crime. Back in Brookfield, Emily tried to reclaim fragments of her life. The nursery had been emptied, the crib dismantled. Friends and neighbors kept their distance, not out of cruelty, but out of helplessness. No one knew what to say to a woman whose child had been murdered by the man she once trusted most. Rachel moved in temporarily, refusing to leave Emily alone. She too had questions. How had they missed the signs? How had Jason hidden so much darkness behind such a carefully curated mask? As law enforcement expanded their manhunt across the southern U.S., one thing became clear: Jason wasn't just hiding. He was executing a plan he had been perfecting for years. And it wasn't over yet. Nearly a month had passed since the discovery of Caleb's body, and Jason Myers remained at large. His name was now tied to one of the most unsettling manhunts in recent history. The story had gone national, and yet he managed to stay a ghost. Authorities were no longer chasing a desperate man on the run. They were hunting a predator who had planned every step. But even the most careful fugitives make mistakes. On the second week of July, an alert came in from a storage facility outside of El Paso, Texas. The facility manager had noticed a foul odor leaking from one of the units. The account was registered under the name Daniel Keene, but the payment card used had triggered a red flag in the federal system. It was a prepaid debit card, one Jason had purchased 2 years prior and never used until now. Agents moved in fast. Inside the unit, the smell wasn't death. It was gasoline. Multiple red canisters sat in the corner, capped but partially full. Alongside them were hiking boots, 2 large duffel bags, and a stack of prepaid phones still in their boxes. There was no sign of Jason, but what they did find felt like something out of a movie script. Pinned to the back wall was a map, 4 states highlighted in red. Lines connected small towns, rural bus routes, and deserted highways. A legend marked with symbols showed rest stops, border crossings, and supply stations. It wasn't just a getaway plan, it was a network, a blueprint for a total vanishing act. Among the items was a burner phone. Jason had apparently discarded without activating. Technicians managed to recover fragments of GPS history from its startup diagnostics. One ping led them to a small auto body shop on the outskirts of Las Cruces. The shop owner, when questioned, admitted he had sold a used Toyota Camry to a man who looked a lot like that guy on TV. The car had been paid for in cash. No license required. The man wore sunglasses and a baseball cap. Said his name was Paul. He was calm. Too calm. Agents put out a fresh alert. The Camry was registered to no one, and had not been entered into any formal database. It was perfect for slipping through unnoticed. Roadblocks were increased in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. But still, Jason had a head start. Meanwhile, forensic experts dug into a peculiar find at the storage unit. A waterproof container hidden beneath the floorboards. Inside were 10 fake IDs, all with Jason's face but different names, birth dates and states. Each matched a separate alias found in his encrypted files. One identity, Stephen Granger, showed recent use at a motel in Flagstaff, Arizona. By the time agents arrived, the room was empty. But this time, there was a clue Jason hadn't meant to leave behind. A receipt. Folded inside the room's Bible was a crumpled gas station receipt. It was only 48 hours old. On the back, written in pen, was a name, Alex Navarro. Investigators had no record of the name connected to Jason, but handwriting experts confirmed the writing was his. The name itself meant nothing until they searched passenger logs at a small regional airport nearby. There it was. A one-way charter flight, booked under the name Alex Navarro, paid in cash. The plane had departed early that morning, headed for a small airstrip near the Mexican border. No passport required. Jason had been hours ahead of them again. It became clearer that he had orchestrated not just a murder, but an entire escape system, built piece by piece over years. Each clue gave authorities a piece of the puzzle, but every new discovery confirmed what they feared most. Jason Myers hadn't broken down. He hadn't panicked. He was executing the endgame of a chilling, meticulous plan. And now, he was one step from disappearing forever. The private plane touched down just before sunrise on a dirt runway near the outskirts of Hermosillo, Mexico. No security, no customs, no questions asked. Jason Myers stepped off the aircraft wearing an entirely new identity. Fake documents, altered appearance, and a duffel bag full of cash. It had taken months of planning, careful purchases, and calculated steps. Now he was here, a free man in a place where few would know his face or care about his past. He didn't go to a hotel. He didn't use a taxi. Instead, he walked nearly 2 miles a small roadside inn that he had researched months earlier. The innkeeper spoke little English, didn't ask for ID, and accepted US dollars. Jason stayed 2 nights. During the day, he rarely left his room. At night, he slipped out, watching the roads, studying the locals, blending in like a shadow. He was methodical, moving from one safe location to another, never staying longer than necessary. He knew how to live invisible. But what he didn't know was that the FBI, in collaboration with Mexican federal authorities, had begun to narrow their focus. Through painstaking analysis of fuel purchases, satellite footage, and airstrip activity, they had traced his flight path, the timing of the gas station receipt, the list of charter pilots in Arizona, and the alias Alex Navarro all pointed to one aircraft and one route. They knew he had landed somewhere in Sonora. What they didn't know yet was where he planned to go next. Jason hadn't left much to chance. He had fake papers indicating he was a Canadian tourist named Samuel Cross. His goal was to move further south, toward Guatemala, then disappear into smaller villages where no one would ever find him. The money from the prepaid cards would last months. His Spanish was passable. He believed the hardest part was behind him. He was wrong. Back in the U.S., a forensic audit team was analyzing Jason's online footprint once more. They combed through his encrypted folders for overlooked details, metadata timestamps, image files. That's when they discovered a single seemingly unrelated JPEG. At first glance, it was just a photo of a beach, waves, a sunset, a boat in the distance. But the image had GPS coordinates embedded in its data. A beach town in Mexico's Nayarit region, hundreds of miles from Hermosillo. When investigators cross-referenced the location with Jason's browser history, they found repeated visits to rental properties in that exact area. A pattern emerged. Jason hadn't intended to stay in Sonora. He was heading west, toward the coast. Working closely with Mexican authorities, the FBI set up a dragnet around Puerto Vallarta and surrounding beach towns. Undercover agents were deployed. Jason didn't know it yet, but his movements were being quietly tracked through street cameras and drone surveillance. In one clip, he was spotted purchasing groceries in a remote village market, wearing a straw hat and sunglasses, walking with the calm confidence of someone who believed he had escaped. But it was a moment of carelessness that finally exposed him. He used a payphone to make a call, just one, but it was enough. The call was to a long-defunct VoIP account, once linked to his fake alias. The routing system flagged the activity, and within hours agents had triangulated the source. Jason had moved into a small beachfront bungalow outside Sayulita. Authorities made no announcement, no media, no warning. Instead, at 3:42 a.m., they surrounded the bungalow with precision and silence. Drones hovered above. Thermal scanners confirmed movement inside. Jason was alone. When the breach team entered, they found him sitting calmly at the table, flipping through a paperback novel. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. His expression was blank, neither angry nor afraid, just quiet. The capture of Jason Myers ended a 6-week international manhunt, but the story wasn't over. Not even close, because what came next would unravel everything they thought they understood about his motives, and the terrifying truth he had never told anyone. The arrest of Jason Myers sent shockwaves through both the U.S. and Mexican authorities. After 6 weeks of vanishing acts and dead ends, he was finally in custody. The man who had murdered his own 2-year-old son and staged a cold, methodical escape across international borders had been caught without a single struggle. No last stand. No gunfight. Just eerie calm. He was extradited back to the United States within days. The trial was set in motion. But from the moment Jason entered federal custody, it became clear something was off. He didn't speak during interrogations. He refused to answer questions, didn't request a lawyer, and spent most of his time staring silently at the wall of his holding cell. He ate. He slept. But he never showed remorse. Never flinched when shown photos of Caleb. Never reacted when investigators mentioned Emily or Rachel. He was completely void of emotion, like the crime had happened to someone else. Psychological evaluations followed. The court appointed 2 forensic psychiatrists. Their reports came back nearly identical. Jason Myers was not insane. He was cold, calculated, and fully aware of his actions. But one thing puzzled them both: his complete disassociation from the murder. It was as if in his mind, Caleb had never existed. Then came the discovery that would change everything. As prosecutors prepared their case, a digital forensics expert revisited Jason's external hard drives. They had already found incriminating files, false identities, escape plans, and disturbing journal entries. But now, buried deep in a hidden partition, was something else. A set of video diaries, each one was time-stamped, methodically labeled. The earliest dated back nearly 2 years before Caleb's death. There were over 50 of them. In these videos, Jason spoke candidly, addressing the camera in a calm, detached tone. He outlined his frustrations with life, his resentment toward fatherhood, his hatred of responsibility, and his belief that he had been trapped in a life meant for someone else. He talked about Emily like she was a stranger. He described Caleb not as a child, but as a burden, a weight dragging him down. But one video stood out from the rest. It was marked simply, "The Choice." In it, Jason explained everything. Not just the murder, but why. And it was more disturbing than anyone expected. He didn't kill Caleb just to escape. He didn't kill him just for the insurance money or to start a new life. Jason had become obsessed with control. The idea of crafting a perfect narrative, a story in which he would orchestrate tragedy, become a ghost, and rebuild himself from the ashes. He called it a cleansing. He believed that eliminating Caleb wasn't just necessary, it was symbolic. A final act to sever him from the life he had grown to hate. Caleb, in his words, was the last chain. He had considered faking his own death, disappearing without violence, but something shifted months before the murder. He wanted more than escape. He wanted to prove he could commit the ultimate betrayal and still win. Not be caught, not feel guilt, just erase and restart. Authorities sat in stunned silence as the videos were played in court. Reporters wept. Emily collapsed in her hit. Jason watched his own footage with the same empty expression he had when arrested. Detached, unaffected, even amused. The jury didn't deliberate long. Jason Myers was found guilty of first-degree murder, insurance fraud, obstruction of justice, and unlawful flight. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But the haunting truth lingered far beyond the courtroom. Jason had never snapped. He had never lost control. He had murdered Caleb, not out of rage or fear, but as a twisted experiment in personal reinvention, a conscious decision made by a man who valued control over human life. And in the end, the most chilling part wasn't how Jason escaped justice for so long. It was how close he came to getting away with everything.